It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can get a hold of me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Really excited today about Andrew Jones. Now check this out. This guy, Noah's Ark Scans.com with an S at the end. Noah's Ark Scans. NoahsArkScans.com. And you can find him on Facebook at Noah's Ark Discovered Project on Facebook, and then on on YouTube, Discovered Media. This guy found Noah's Ark. Check out this website. You can see pictures, man, from the sky. Mr. Jones, are you there?
I am here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, man. I'm really excited about this. I've been looking forward to this one. Andrew Jones, tell us about you. Before we get into Noah's Ark, forget Noah's Ark for a minute. Who is Andrew Jones?
Well, I grew up in the United States. I currently live, though, in eastern Turkey, about 30 minutes from the site that we are investigating. We believe it to be the buried remains of Noah's Ark, which is about 1 mile from the Iranian border, which, as you know, Iran is in the news a lot lately. But myself, I am a biblical researcher, a tour guide out here in the Middle East and in Turkey. And I started, though, as a computer programmer, sitting behind a desk making iOS apps and websites and databases. I got bored with that and wanted to travel more and started investigating these sites that I learned about through Ron Wyatt, who passed away in 1999, but he was an American explorer and adventurer who was doing these biblical projects over in the Middle East and claimed he had found Mount Sinai and Noah's Ark. And so I had to go see these sites myself. And so in 1997, in the middle of college, I went overseas for the first time to see this boat site here in eastern Turkey. And I knew I had to come back and keep coming back and do my own research at this site. And so then I ended up living here starting at this 2020 at the start of the pandemic. So that's basically where my base is. But I also do trips into the Middle East from Turkey. So we also investigate the proposed Mount Sinai site in Saudi Arabia, the route of the Exodus and the Red Sea crossing in Egypt. And so those are some of the other projects we were working on. But for myself, I really have a passion for this Noah's Ark boat formation here. And I hope to share what some of the latest research we've been doing here.
Yeah, you would have to have an enormous passion to just uplift and move to Turkey, and especially, I love the sandwiches, by the way, the turkey sandwiches. But let me ask you a question now. You're over there now, and all this stuff is going on with Iran. Yeah. What's going on the news? How are you? Do you have a shelter to take if something happens?
Well, no, I don't have a shelter, so maybe I need to find one. What's really interesting, so this site, I was just there 30 minutes ago, and I was rushing back to make it to my apartment to do the interview. And at the site, I asked the Kurdish man who manages the visitor center that they've built above the boat site, and I asked him, has he seen anything in the skies above, or because we're right across the border from Iran? And he did say when the Israelis were bombing, I think it's Tabriz, which is an Iranian city had a nuclear reactor or some program with military stuff there. They could see the smoke going into the sky. I think it's about 100 miles away. But I saw also on social media that the international border crossing between Turkey and Iran, just 30 minutes from where I live, people were posting videos showing the Iranian missiles being fired towards Israel from some of the sites across the border. So that sounds a little too close, but so far nothing's happened on the Turkish side. And so right now everything's good. We just finished a 15-day tour for our American group, and we had no issues out here. But we're keeping an eye on the news. You never know what will happen.
And your plan is to stay and sit it out?
Yeah, Turkey and Iran get along. Right now the politics is difficult between Israel and Turkey, though. But for me as an American, the locals love Americans. I'm mainly a Kurdish populated area. But even the Turks, I have no issue with my Turkish friends. And so we're continuing the research. When the pandemic hit in 2020, same type of deal. The borders were closing, and my local friend said, hey, why don't you stay here? We don't know how long the borders will be closed. You can focus on the research. And that's what I did. And so that really helped me being on the ground nearby to meet the locals and the officials and just do this type of work versus trying to do it from California, where I'm from. So, I'm sticking it out, and so far, no problems on this side of the border.
And did you bring your family with you? Did you relocate all your people, or are you by yourself?
I'm by myself, but my siblings, they still live in California, and sadly, back in 2019, my parents passed away. So it wasn't too difficult for me to relocate. It was a spur of the moment. I had stuff in storage already in 2019. So in 2020 came along, we had the borders closing. Everything with me in my backpack, that's what I came with. And I just resettled here in Turkey.
I tell you, man, it blows my mind when I hear stories like this. Just such bravery, you know. Now, what inspired your passion about Noah's Ark? Did you grow up Christian and you read the Bible? I read the I read the whole Bible back and forth several times. But what was it that inspired you to get involved in all this?
Yeah, so when I was a child, yes, my parents were Christians, and they raised my sister and brother and I as Christians. So I already had that faith in the biblical stories and believed that they were true. I had an interest early on in archaeology and history. So when a man came out to California and said he had discovered Noah's Ark, and this is Ron Wyatt, this was in the middle. When I first heard about him, this was in the middle of 7th or 8th grade for me. And so it was I remember it was a Thursday night, and this guy had a meeting schedule at my church, but I was a kind of a geek back then. So I told my father, hey, I have homework to do. Why don't you go find out what this man says and come back and tell me? And my dad was willing to do it for me. So he went out to the meeting, and it was a one-night meeting. He came back and said, well, this man said he found Noah's Ark and Mount Sinai and all this. And so I said, well, I'm going to go look up his name. I found out he had written a small little book called Discovered Noah's Ark. And in the back, this is 91 or 1990, so it's before the internet. And I remember they had a P.O. box listed, and it said Madison, Tennessee. So about a week or two later, after that, I decided to call 411. And I remember the operator asked me, like, where I want to call to. And I said, well, I'm looking for a Ronald Wyatt in Madison, Tennessee. And the operator put me through, and the phone rang, and he picked up. And I remember I was kind of stunned because I was like, I had all these questions I want to ask, but I was just a kid. And so that kind of started me bugging him to death, probably, throughout my middle school and high school years and into college. I finally invited him out with some friends. We had him do lectures in California in 1995 and 1996. And then in 1997, a friend of mine wanted to go see this boat site, and he asked me to be a travel companion. He was from Florida. So I went out there with him, and we spent about 4 or 5 days here on the ground. It was my first trip to Turkey in 1997. And that was a crazy trip because we had all these ideas of being kidnapped or being killed. So we were very paranoid, all the locals. But we saw this site, and that just got my interest further into doing research here, by myself. And so that was in the middle of college. When I came back 3 years later in 2000, I met a Turkish geologist who has been studying this site, and he's still alive, Dr. Salih Bayrak Tutan. He was assistant professor of geology from Ataturk University in Eastern Turkey. And he became a good friend of mine. We reconnected back in 2020 or 21. And he's been helping us with our recent work on the site. But that's kind of how I got involved early on as a kid, and then in the college coming out here and finally seeing the site. That kind of sold me that there's something to this boat formation, and the work that Ron Wyatt did and others in the 80s also helped me get convinced that this is the buried remains of Noah's Ark.
Yeah, the audience has to check out noahsarkscans.com. There's all kind of pictures and infrared type pictures and stuff, and also to the YouTube videos there at Discovered Media at YouTube. And it's funny you mentioned how when you were a kid you picked up the yellow page, you called information. I used to do the same thing. I called Yankee Stadium, to ask for Billy Martin. I called Eddie Youngman was in the Manhattan phone book. I called him up at home, and he picked up the phone. I was like 8 years old.
Wow. Yeah, people these days don't know how, they never heard of 411. You get the operator. There's no email. You had fax, but there's no way to actually reach out. You had to call the operator and say they could find a number for the person.
Such a different world, man. Now,
yep. Well, I remember I used to call because I started talking to him. I would call for a couple hours at a time, and then at the end of the month, this was before the unlimited minutes and all that. So my parents would get the phone bill, and they're like, "Who are you calling in Tennessee?" And I had to limit my phone calls. But I had a whole list of questions every time I would call Ron, and I would. And I actually I bought a machine that would tape the calls. I didn't tell him I was taping his phone calls, and I would transcribe. I'd write down everything I heard on tape. I reused the tapes. I wish I kept them all, but I was really into asking him everything I could about what he did out here on the site and his other projects. And that's, as a kid, I was seventh, eighth grader. This was kind of my passion at the time, outside of schoolwork, was figuring out these archaeological discoveries.
Yeah, so this is your dream job, man, right? And now you're out there that you do tours when people can come out there and you'll just drop everything and take them on a tour, right?
Yeah, so and that wasn't planned. So when I went to college, I was thinking I'm going to become an archaeologist. I really liked the Indiana Jones movies. I really liked biblical archaeology. Then my parents told me, well, if you go into archaeology, you're not going to make much money, and you'll always be fundraising. I said, get another job in a different career, and then you could do archaeology as a serious side hobby. And so that's what I did. I went into computer science, and that helped paid for my early trips going overseas on digs in Israel. And I just started coming to Turkey more and more. So back in 2013 onward, I started coming multiple times each year, staying 1 to 2 months or more at a time. And until 2019, we brought in the Science Channel to film our work. We had experts who can do ground penetrating radar to look below the soil. So everything worked out for me to do this type of work because I kept coming back. I had to do as much as possible on my own. It was just kind of a passion of mine. And then people started asking me, well, why don't you take me on your trip? And so that's how the tours started. People wanted to join and follow along. So I thought, well, I'm going to make this a little more official if people want to, have to arrange the hotels and flights. And so, now we have tours that they can check out noahsarkscans.com. On the menu, there's a tours menu, and we offer 3, 5, and 12-day tours. Some people say, I'm trying to make money off of this. Well, actually, it's more of a way for people to see the site themselves who are more interested than watching just YouTube videos. And it's a way for us to keep it all organized. But, it does help fund part of the work, having a tour group out here. But, that's just the way it is. It costs money to travel.
So cool. So I think I'm a little older than you. Okay, I'm like 63 years old. And when I was a young guy, they used to have these black and white documentaries, ancient astronauts, all kind of stuff. And one of them was, they said that they found, I think one of the astronauts, by the way, Edgar Mitchell, or one of those guys, was said that they were exploring and they found Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat. Is this the same mountain?
Yeah, so we're right across from the mountain of Ararat. And I think the guys, and there might have been other astronauts interested, but I know the 70s and 80s, Jim Irwin, who was a Christian, he was looking for Noah's Ark, and he knew Ron Wyatt, but they were looking at two different mountains, just right in the same area, but they're right across the valley. So the big volcano, Mount Ararat, which is the tallest mountain in Turkey, is about 17 miles north of where we're at, where the boat formation is. But we're still in the biblical mountains of Ararat. And that's what the Bible says in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, that Noah's Ark landed on the mountains, which is plural, of Ararat, not Mount Ararat. So the Bible doesn't give us the exact peak. So any area within the region of mountains of Ararat would be considered an area to look for Noah's Ark. And if you look at the word Ararat, it comes from the ancient word Urartu, and that was the name of a kingdom, an Iron Age kingdom back, in this area over 2,500 years ago to up to 3,000 years ago. They inhabited this area of eastern Turkey and into Armenia and northern Iran, and it's a very mountainous area, so their castles are found all over. The town I'm living in, a couple miles up the road, there's a castle from the Urartu kingdom on the side of the mountainside there. And so it'd be like me today saying Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Colorado. It's just telling the general idea. So that's what the Bible says, and that's where our site is in this region. But yes, Jim Irwin, maybe some other astronauts, they were looking for Noah's Ark up on the traditional Mount Ararat, which is a stratovolcano just across the valley from us. It's a very majestic mountain, but we don't believe the Ark landed on it because it's a volcano, so I don't think there'll be any remains of it there. And we believe that the site we're looking at now is the real Noah's Ark.
Okay, a couple of questions now. Aren't there some ancient texts, I believe, associated with the word Gilead, that it claims there were more than one ark in this flood story?
Well, there's a story of Gilgamesh, a Babylonian account. Yeah, so there are texts outside the Bible, and you have a lot of flood stories around the world. A lot of cultures have this ancient story of a flood and people surviving on a boat. And so, yes, in the story of Gilgamesh, it's a Babylonian legend, myth story, but it has a lot of the same aspects as what we find in the Bible. And so from the biblical account, though, there was only one boat and 8 people that were on the boat. And so as a Christian, I would accept that over some of the other stories. I do believe that the flood was a way for God to judge the world because of the wickedness. And so only those that were obedient to him, that made the ark and went into the ark, and the Bible says there were only 8 people that did that, survived the flood. So, I don't know what all the details are in the other stories outside of the Bible, but, from my perspective, I would take the biblical account over their details.
Fascinating. So you wouldn't even have an interest to find out what these other stories are, or have you looked into them?
No, I do. Yeah, I've looked at them because what it does show, the main interest is that it shows that this story is in many cultures around the world and in many legends. And so that adds more truth to the story. It's very hard to believe that there was a global flood, for example. That's just people that I can't believe the earth was destroyed and only 8 people survived with animals. It just sounds too fantastical. But when you start seeing that other cultures back then in the Bronze Age and before had the same type of stories, then that I think adds more evidence to the biblical account. But as a Christian, I would put the details of what the Bible says for the ark higher up on the ladder of truth than another account written on clay tablets. But yeah, I do have an interest in those other accounts. In fact, some of the ancient historians up to through the time of Christ, we have the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, and he quotes a lot of ancient historians from his time and before. And they all mentioned that the ark landed in these mountains. Today, you can consider eastern Turkey, this area. They sometimes the modern translations will say Kurdistan or the Kurdish area, or Armenia. They would say the modern translation. But in the biblical account, it says the mountains of Urartu, and we know from archaeology where this ancient kingdom was. And on our tours, we actually go through at least 3 of these castles where they have these majestic castles, the things you think you see in Europe. But this kingdom, which was a very strong kingdom in this area of the world at the time, they have these big stone castles. They had chariots. And this is the area in the mountains of this kingdom that Moses wrote that Noah's Ark landed. And so these ancient historians, they agree, and they say that tourists ancient tourists like today, we have the modern tourist, but back then the people were looking for Noah's Ark, or when they'd go to the site they thought was Noah's Ark, and they would take little talisman and Lucky Charms and souvenirs from the boat, and that's what Josephus wrote about. So to me, that just shows that up through the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago, there was enough remains of the boat visible that people could go visit it. And somehow it got lost since that time until 1959, when the first photograph of the site was published.
And that was like an aerial photograph?
Yeah, so in 1959, the Turkish government joined NATO, and so that year they were mapping out the whole country with high-altitude aerial photography. Now, Captain Durupinar, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was working as a cartographer in the Turkish army, and so he was mapping out all these little villages and these sites because Turkey, at that time, bordered the Soviet Union, with Armenia being part of the Soviet Union. And so these were very sensitive areas along the border, and so that he was mapping it out, and he discovered the boat-shaped object on September 11, of all dates, September 11, 1959. And it hit the news within a week after he had discovered it. But it took, I think it was October of that year when the actual photograph of the site was released by the Turkish military, and it went around the world. People were saying, wow, here's a boat-shaped object. At that time, they didn't know what peak it was on. Now we know it's, 17 miles south of the big mountain on these smaller mountains nearby, right beside the Iranian border. But it caused a worldwide interest in the site. And then by the following summer, we had a Turkish-American expedition come out here, and they were investigating the site. They took ground photographs. They even used dynamite to try to figure out what was below the soil. But that was the first expedition to the site. It was 1960.
Why don't you take us back to the Bible and give us all the details in this biblical story? Because people know like the surface story, animals and two of every kind, this stuff. But take us back to what it really says in the Bible, and then take us then to what you found now that confirms everything that we've read that's documented in the Bible.
Yeah, okay. So if you look at Genesis chapter 6, this is the start of the flood story. And the first part of the chapter, God basically says that man had become evil. So that everything in their heart, every thought of theirs was evil. And he only found one family, or actually it mentions one man, Noah, who had found favor or grace in the eyes of God. And so God, though, decided that he had to destroy man and restart over, because of the wickedness and violence of the earth. And so he gave Noah instructions to build this giant boat, a wooden boat. The Bible says it was made from gopher wood, which we don't know 100% what type of tree that was. But basically it took them 120 years. Noah was preaching for 120 years, and him and his family and who knows who else helped build this boat. When the time of the flood came, though, only 8 people made it on. But the Bible only gives very general details. It doesn't give us every little thing about the boat, but it does tell us it was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Now, if today we use the metric system or the English system, and so we're using the meters and feet. But back then, the main standard of measurement was the Royal Egyptian cubit. So this is during the time of the late Bronze Age.
Egypt was elbow to your middle finger.
That's the general idea, but it was an official measurement that was standardized. So it wasn't just the next guy coming along measuring. No, they actually found these measuring not just in Mesopotamia, but in the tombs in Egypt. For example, the treasure to Tutankhamun, his tomb, they found this cubit measuring rod, and you can see them in the museums. One is in Saqqara. You can see one of these cubit measuring rods, and they're exactly 20.62 inches long. I don't know how many millimeters that is, but for the English system, that's what it would convert to. So one Royal Egyptian cubit would be 20.62 inches long. So if you do the math, 300 Royal Egyptian cubits comes out, and you divide it by 12 to get feet. It comes out to be 515 feet long. And so it just happens to be the length of this boat's object on the side of the mountains in the region of Ararat. And so that was one of the key things that got people interested, not just like, hey, we have a boat shape on the side of a mountain, and it's in the area or the region of the mountains of Ararat, but it exactly matches the length given in the Bible. And so that's either a strange coincidence, or that's, for me, it's another pointer that says this is the site, and people should pay more attention to it. So the Bible then goes on and says there was one door in the side of this boat and one window at the top of it. So we don't know how that functioned, how the Bible doesn't say how the sewer system worked or where was Noah's bed or how many animals were on the boat. So it's very basic. We do know that there were 3 levels. So if you could consider the hall, the bottom of the hall, the first level, you had a middle deck and a top deck, and that was it. And this is where the preserved life, and it went through almost a year in this ark, or maybe a little over a year, I believe, and it landed then in the mountains of Ararat in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, and that's all. It doesn't tell us in the GPS coordinates or anything else about the ark. Now, some people, when they read this account and they see those 3 measurements, the height, width, and breadth, they immediately assume that, this has to be like a barge, a flat bottom barge, or a rectangular block of created, built for the survival of the animals. But the problem is when you look at that word ark and you go to ancient Egypt, and the same word is used that they put Moses into a reed basket that says it was an ark. And that's when he was a baby. They put him in the Nile River. You have examples of these baskets in the museums, and they're all different shapes and sizes. Some are square, some are rectangular, some are oval, some are circular. So the word ark has nothing to do with the shape. It has to do with the functionality. It was to preserve life, and this is what Noah's Ark was. We had the animals and the 8 people on there. And so when you see this boat-shaped formation that everyone got interested in 1959, it doesn't go against the biblical account. The Bible has nothing to say about it being a barge. What's really interesting, this last tour, we were here in eastern Turkey. We had 22 people from Florida. And one guy just randomly contacted me. Actually, he just showed up at the ARC site. I'm sorry. He was at the visitor center. He came up and said, "You're Andrew Jones. I watch your videos." He was not part of our tour. I said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm Doctor." I won't give his full name, but and I said, "Well, oh, okay." And then he said, "Well, let me tell you about myself." He said, I was under, I think it was the first or second Bush administration. He says, I worked in the National Security Council. Before that, I had 30 or 40 years as a Coast Guard, in the Coast Guard. Some of those years, I was captain of 2 different vessels. And he said, this right here, this boat-shaped formation, that's exactly the style that we built boats back in World War II, and what they started building the Coast Guard boats in the early 90s. He said, you have a pointed bow and a rounded stern. And he said, and I said, well, what does that mean? He explained this to me. And he said, well, he said the pointed bow helps a boat navigate, not navigate, but basically go through the waves. As oncoming waves are hitting this boat, which has no, power. It's not a sailboat. There's no engine. It's just floating on the water. He said the worst thing for a boat to do is become parallel with these oncoming waves, so that the waves could crash over this boat and capsize it, turn it upside down. And he said, but if you have a pointed bow and you have counterweight hanging from the sides, you can basically keep the bow pointed into the waves. And he said, then you have the back being rounded. He said they do the exact same thing with the Coast Guard ships and these World War II vessels, the rounded stern, the back end of the boat. When any waves come from that direction, it helps disperse that energy, so that the boat itself is not then twisted sideways, so that then it's again parallel with these giant waves that we assumed were hitting the earth during the global flood. So he said, and he was basically saying it was a perfect design, just looking at the shape of it alone. And I asked him about the whole rectangular barge. He said, no, that would not survive in the open seas, rough seas. Those vessels are made for coastal shallow areas. That's why it's flat bottom instead of a V-shaped hull. And those are, you look at barges that go up and down the rivers. He said, that's what those are for. But what he saw there exactly matched. So then I went to Google. I looked up World War II boat design. And then I find this document. It was on I think it was on a U.S. government website, just discussing boat theory and all that. And sure enough, there was a silhouette of the different boat shapes from World War II. And it's exactly what this guy said, who just showed up out of the blue. And I looked the guy up, make sure he was he gave me his name. I saw his old interviews on YouTube, and he was working with counter, not terrorism, but hostage his expertise was getting hostages released, American hostages, under the Bush administration. And so he was a legit guy, and it was really interesting what he told me, that this boat shape on the side of the mountain matched exactly what modern boats were designed to survive out in the open seas.
Back up a little bit. You mentioned that the ark you discovered is 500 feet long, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then have you done
515 feet?
Okay, yeah. Roughly. Now, have you done the math? Like, how many animals could you fit on a boat that size? And how would you carry it? It was out there for a year, you said, too? It was up floating for a year? So how much feed would you need? And how much waste would they produce? How would 8 people clean up all that waste? There's a lot of questions there, bro. How do you do this?
Yeah, and that's where the Bible doesn't give us all the little details. But, they did a physics studies. Let me see if I can find the article. It was done in 2013, maybe. Let's see if I can find my notes for it. But the study basically showed that the boat could hold, like if you're looking at sheep as the size of the animal, like an average size. Here we go, right here. This was done basically the title of the study was, Could Noah's Ark Float? And this was November 11, Journal of Physics, 2013. And so these students, they said basically their conclusion was, you don't think of the Bible necessarily as a scientifically accurate source of information. So I guess we were quite surprised when we discovered it would work. And this was a quote by Thomas Morris, one of the students who wrote this article that was published in the peer-reviewed journal. And he said, and the article stated, this is November 11, 2013, Journal of Physics. It says, our calculations show that the ark was of necessary size to provide a buoyancy force to support the weight of 2.15 million sheep, which the sheep represents the average size of animals. So we believe the ark to be of sufficient buoyancy. So here's just a modern study using the basic information given in Genesis, that you could have up to 2.15 million animals if they're the size of sheep. So of course you have like elephants, and bigger animals than sheep, but then we don't know if they were small. The Bible doesn't say if they were younger or baby animals taken on board versus full-size adults. This one thing the Bible leaves out. So in regards to waste management or how do you feed them, and then again, it comes down to what was the process? Were they put in hibernation? Do they need less food on the journey for being in the boat? There's a lot of details that are not there, and so there's things by faith as a Christian believer. Even though science says it can float and you can have 2 million sheep, by faith I believe the story happened and that they had the animals on the boat. And so all the little details about sewer or where the bed was or how much food they took on, I don't know myself.
Well, there's no shortage of miracles in the Bible. Okay,
that's true.
And Jesus did feed the loaves and the fishes, so we know that it's possible to.
You could just keep on multiplying the food. Yeah.
We know it's been done. So
Yeah, that's. I hadn't actually thought of that before. Yeah, it's for sure. The miracle was not just preserving life in a boat, but maybe God just kept on feeding them. Look at the manna, the Israelites in the desert.
Right.
How would 600,000 men, they say, not counting women and children, how would you feed them in the middle of the desert with no source of food? And so for 40 years. And of course, the Bible says that this manna, this bread that they call angel bread, that just fell from the sky every morning, it was something they could use to make food and cook and bake with it. And so, again, it's a miracle. And so the story of the Noah's Ark, the flood, is definitely a miracle. But because I believe it exists, I believe that the remains of it are still out there. And the site we're looking at is the best proposed site, I believe.
I tell you, I'm enjoying this so much. I'm enjoying this conversation so much. I can't thank you enough. Andrew Jones, noahsarkscans.com. And then check out his Facebook is Noah's Ark Discovered Project. And then his YouTube is Discovered Media. Okay, now, first of all, originally, how did the 8 guys and all these animals make it down from that mountain? Like, can you walk up there? What's the deal? You have to hike how many days? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so if you believe Noah's Ark landed on a stratovolcano, which is the traditional site, some people say they've seen it up there. That could be a problem because it's a very steep mountain. You're wondering how the different types of animals came off that mountain, or how did the boat land and not roll off the mountain? Well, so our site is actually not on the steep Mount Ararat. It's across the valley, where the current location for this site is about 6,500 feet off or high. Let's call it, I can't think right now, above sea level. That's the word. And so it's not on the side of a very steep mountain. This is a lower mountain range that is made up of sedimentary rock, meaning that was, flood deposit material laid down, and this boat formation is on top of it. And so you can easily today drive up to see the site. There's roads the Turkish government has put in because they're nearby villages and military installations. So it's not impossible to walk off the Ark. I've walked through many of those mountains and hills in that area, just part of the research or just out for a walk. And those hills are easy they have sheep today and donkeys and their sheepdogs walking all over those hills. So it is very possible for the animals to come off the Ark and disperse from there and come down off the mountainside.
Now, what about you hear these stories about you go up to the top, and even in Vegas at Lake Mead and stuff like that, at the top of the hills, you would see seashells and river rock and stuff like that at the top of the hills. Do you see that kind of indications of flooding up there, seashells and river rock?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so right by the Iranian-Turkish border, which I've been up to on different times, part of our research, you can find in this earth flow, this mud flow on the side of the mountain where the boat is at, you find chunks of fossilized coral and seashells. I found a fossilized snail once. We have in the visitor center building that's on a hill overlooking the boat site. Inside there, we have a lot of examples and specimens of these fossilized seashells from the shallow water, like sand dollars, just regular seashells, but also coral of different types and sizes that they're all through that area. Now, there's a limestone ridge above the boat site up on the horizon, and right there, right beside the Iranian border, there I've been walking through those areas, and you see lots of fossils just embedded in the limestone, which itself is sedimentary rock. So you find not just seashells, but again, this chunks of coral, showing that this area was once underwater.
Just fascinating. And if the Turkish government has built roads and stuff to go up there for the purpose of seeing this site, is that what they're doing?
Well, actually, the purpose of the roads is for the villagers and mainly the military, because it's right beside the Iranian border. So there are border fortresses up and down that area. And just recently, last couple of years, the Turkish government has built their own wall, kind of what Trump was trying to do on the Mexican border. Well, Erdogan has done it in Turkey, and it's a high. I've been up right beside the wall and on the other side. As part of our research, we got permission one time so that I could fly a drone from with permission of the Turkish military, fly it from the Iranian side and document the border markers. We were looking for inscriptions of any type. And I got permission to fly it into Iran, my drone, and the guy basically, the commander watched carefully and told me exactly. He said, only take pictures, no video, and only take pictures of the marker and not of the area. And so I was very nervous because it was my personal drone, and here I had the commander and his bodyguard, and then the Turkish archaeologist and one other official watching me as I'm flying this. I'm thinking, number one, I don't want to lose the drone because it's very expensive on the Iranian side, and they capture it. And then number two, I don't want to cause any international incident. So that was right up above the Ark site. The theory is that the boat landed higher up on the mountainside because as the water receded of the flood, the first appearance of land, that's where the boat would land and get stuck at. And so higher up the mountain, you're looking at close to 8,500 feet elevation. So maybe another 2,000 feet higher than where it's at today. And then over time, you can look even on Google Satellite or Google Maps, you can see this whole area looks like a landslide. And so the boat would have been slid down the mountainside to where it's caught right now at 6,500 foot elevation. And that's where they put the visitor center that they built in 1987. And these roads are going by that area. It's a very steep, windy road to get up to the site. But it was mainly, the roads were mainly built for the locals that live nearby or the military bases higher up the mountainside.
I'm involved in another little project here. I get involved in a lot of crazy stuff. Where a fellow got kidnapped by the Iranians. Yeah, he was over there, FBI background, CIA background, but he became a hostage over in Iran. Do you have a fear for yourself that you could be captured in a...
Well, so I remember a story, and I don't know how many years ago, you probably might know this, when some hikers just south of here, they crossed the border because it was unmarked, American hikers, and the Iranians, captured them, and they claimed that they were CIA spies, and the hikers are claiming they were just, lost. And that's right now it's very difficult to do that, thanks to this new wall with the road built beside it. So the wall is on the Turkish side. But then on the other side of the wall, they have these towers every like 500 meters. And I've been at the base of those towers, and I have photographs of myself standing right next to the barbed wire and beside the markers that show the international boundary, and then flying the drone on the other side of the barbed wire to try to document these stone markers. But because of all the fortifications there and the tall 20-foot high wall or so, I never thought that the Iranians would cross the border to try to get me.
But so you had permission to fly the drone over there from the Iranians?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the thing. I didn't ask all the details what the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism, which manages archaeology, got, but they basically said, because as an American, you can't go, number one, near the border, and you can't enter these military bases. So the person who got it for me, they said, look, this is a very unique situation. It took permissions all the way up into Ankara, the capital city, to get this. And so it just created more pressure for me. But I was very thankful to be able to go there and try to, we didn't find any ancient inscriptions, but it's right above the Noah's Ark site. And we had people claiming that they had saw inscriptions up there. And so what they told me was that I had permission on the Turkish side, but that they had informed the Iranian side that we would be doing this on it was 2 days that we went up there. And so I didn't ask all the details, like what exactly it means, like what did the Iranians say, or what are they doing? So I have all the drone photographs. They let me keep copies as far as research. But and I've been up there 3 times on that border, and up on the cliff that has these the coral pieces were found, the fossilized coral, because Ron Wyatt claimed that he had seen petroglyphs of animals that are no longer in Turkey. Like he said, he saw an elephant and a giraffe carved on these rocks. That's right above the Ark site. And so again, that is a border area that tourists are not allowed to go to. You can see it from the visitor center, where the boat-shaped object is, but to go all the way up along the border, you're not allowed to. And one time we didn't have permission, and we walked up there. I think it was 2013. And right away, the military guards on the border came down with like 6 or 7 dogs, 2 soldiers, and all these big, mean-looking sheepdogs come running down at us. And they were nice kids. They're like in their 20s. And they basically said, no, you have to turn around. You're not allowed to be at the base of this limestone cliff. And we were trying to look for these inscriptions. But thankfully, last year, we started working there, doing research, because we met some local commanders who had all the connections, and they basically said, let's go up there. So we went up there with some troops, some of the military guys, and they let us scramble over the rocks, try to find these inscriptions. And we only had a half a day, but so we hope to continue that until it's all done, do this survey work up there. But it's very interesting because you're close to the border, but you don't feel like, okay, the Iranians will come over. You have I have a lot of friends now in that area, in the little villages around, and they're just so hospitable. They love tourists. They love Americans, these Kurdish villages and the Turks in the area. I've never felt unsafe being out here.
And you have translators? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I have a small amount of Turkish that I've learned, and a very small amount of Kurdish. But I have friends here who are my translators, and they speak the language, and Turkish, and so that definitely helps. And then you have Google. If you're on your own, you can use Google Translate. You have internet access, and so that has helped me a lot too. So it's easy to get around.
Didn't Trump kind of bail on the Kurds? There was some kind of policy change for the Kurds. Did something like that happen?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on the political, the ins and outs of every administration that comes through. The Kurds, what's really interesting, the locals, even in other countries I go to, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt, they separate the government actions from the people. And so they're really hospitable to foreigners and Americans. They love us. But in regards to their views of political leaders, each person is different, what they say. But I've never run into any issues with Turks or Kurds out here.
Okay, now you say that some people, besides Wyatt, saw inscriptions up there. If they saw these inscriptions, or even if Wyatt saw these inscriptions, why didn't they take pictures of them?
Actually, Wyatt did take some photos. Okay. Now, so in regards to the animals, like he said he saw these inscriptions of animals on the side of this cliff, we call it an escarpment, this limestone cliff up above the Ark site. He said it was 1984. I think he was climbing around up there with one of his guides, and he didn't have a camera with them. They got access to the border that day, and so they were just scrambling around looking. He claimed he saw these animals up there in the middle of that escarpment. But since that time, no one else has been up there. It's a border area. And so my first time being up there was last year along that escarpment to try to find these animals. And we only spent half a day, so there's a lot more rocks to crawl around and look at. And so I hope that we can continue that. Now, in regards to the border itself, he believed the Ark landed higher up than where it is, as we talked about. And he believed near that original landing site that one of these modern border markers contained inscriptions about Noah's Ark. It had the same boat shape, he believed, and it had 8 faces in it, matching the biblical account. And so basically a petroglyph, picture type carvings, no words. And that we have not found. And so his pictures show these broken up rocks and possible inscriptions. But when we went up there to look at those same border markers, they didn't match what he was thinking. Some of them looks like modern Farsi, which is the Iranian language. And so these markers are marked with numbers. And so on one side, you have Farsi on the Iranian side, because half the border's marker is on the Iranian side. The other half is on Turkey, the Turkish side. And on the Turkish side, you have the Roman, you have the modern, or we call it Latin numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4. But on the Iranian side, they have their own numbers, and they're very similar to Arabic, the way they write. And one of them, for example, the number 5 or 6, it's a heart shape, like upside down heart. And when it's broken, it looks like a boat, like part of a boat. Wow. And so from one of Ron's photos, this is an area, where I actually gave a paper about this at a symposium. As, some of the research doesn't always pan out. Some people say, I saw this. So we go check it out, and okay, it didn't work out, or they misinterpreted the data. And this is one of the points where the inscriptions that Ron thought he saw on the border, we're actually seeing that to be modern Farsi numbers. So far we haven't found anything ancient up there, but we're still looking for those animals. And we haven't finished our survey work up there, so we'll see.
That's encouraging, because you have to take your investigation has to take you where it leads you to. You have to, based on the facts. You can't try and make the investigation fit your theory.
Exactly, and we publish. Yeah, and on our website we publish pro and con. Like, we have papers up there, people who say this is a geological formation and not Noah's Ark. We have my research about the border marker inscriptions and the search for them. We go where the data goes, and I really do believe that the buried remains of Noah's Ark, but not every little thing about the site that people have claimed will be true. But that's fine for me.
So Andrew Jones from NoahsArkScans.com. How do you fund all this, man? Out of your own pocket? What's going on here?
Yeah, so it started that way. I had a computer job, making good money, so I'd do my own trips. Then, as I mentioned earlier, people wanted to come along and see the same sites, because when I come back from a trip, we had home group meetings or churches that would ask me to do presentations and talk about what I was seeing. So I'd give those presentations, and then people would come up afterwards and say, how can I come with you on your next trip? And so that's how the tours started, and that helped pay for the research, the tours. And then we had people on the side also give extra money if they really believe in the project. worldwide, people have sent money in, say, okay, I would like to help with this, or that. And so, for example, this year, not this year, but in 2022, we renovated the visitor center that was built in 1987. It was run down. The bathrooms were bad. We needed a room to show videos. We created a media room. We created a kitchen so they can serve chai, Turkish tea and coffee. And then we fixed the roof. It was leaking all over the place. And so people stepped forward, and this is bigger than what I could do on my own. And thankfully, people who saw the need and wanted to help. And so that we sometimes we put those out on our YouTube videos. Say, hey, this year's project is this. If you want to help, go to our website. But yeah.
And we were talking off the air. You actually had to put money on your phone there to do this interview. So people should go to noahsarkscans.com and hit that donate button, just out of consideration. And thanks for coming on the show with this great information. Now, you were telling me off the air, too, that you wanted to talk about the ground penetrating radar. Okay, now the GPR I'm familiar with, it's a pretty small machine. You have to you move it by hand. It's like a wheelbarrow. Is that what you're up there using? Is that what you're using up there?
There's different sizes. Yeah, so there's different sizes. Well, you basically bring it down through the mud flow on the side of this mountain, and once you get onto the boat, it's pretty smooth. But on the outside of the edges of the boat, there's a lot of crevices and cracks. There are trails around, so we had it brought down on the site. And there now, in the past, you had to use like car batteries to power things and extra batteries. Things now are more compact, digital now. So in the 80s, when Dr. Sally Brock-Touton and Ron Wyatt and David Fasold and later Dr. John Baumgartner, these people were using GPR, this radar. It was all analog. And so if you remember the old thermal printers, it's the same type of deal. You have this roll of paper, and it would print out as you're pulling the scanner along the ground. It would print out the results of what the scanner was seeing, these reflections on the paper. And now everything's digitized, so it creates a point cloud with millions of dots, depending on how much data you're collecting. And then you can slice and dice it and turn it around and make a 3D model and filter it. And so the geophysicist has all those different types of software that they can use on their computer to review the results and come to a conclusion. And so, that's what we've been using. Our first scans were done in 2019, and then we took that data, and basically the whole thing worked out that on this trip we had someone randomly email me who said, hey, I would like to help. How can I help? And so I said, well, we're trying to do GPR this year, but we have 1 month to get it done before everything's done for the winter season. This is end of September. And then he said, well, guess what? My friend is a VP of a company out of Oregon with offices in Atlanta, and they do GPR as part of some of their work. And let me contact him. And so within a week, we had a team formed, we had agreements signed, and we had the initial funding done. And within 2 weeks, the team was over in Turkey. And it just so happened that week that they were there, it was the week that 6 months earlier was already picked for the Science Channel to come out and film. So a team from London came out, and they were happy because they had some action to film, and they were able to produce this 1 hour show for the Science Channel, which has been aired over and over on different cable networks now. But that was back in 2019, and so we got this data, and then we just we asked them, who should we give this to? They found someone in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Bigman, who was able to look at the initial results, and he found these right angles 7 meters down, about 21 feet, on the northwest side of this boat, inside the boat shape that we believe is Noah's Ark. And he said, look, this pattern of right angles you're seeing 21 feet below the surface, this suggests that it's not a natural formation. He said, if I were to do an excavation, I would dig right there. And so that was very encouraging because, we're just out there collecting data. We didn't, you can't force the results. So we don't know what the radar is going to show. And we use 2 different types of antennas that could get us different resolutions and go different depths into the side of the mountain. And so the deepest we got was over 13 meters down with our 100 megahertz antenna. And so this guy, he's an archaeologist, but he's also a geophysicist, and he trains archaeologists on how to use GPR, how to use radar in archaeology. And he reviewed our initial data. And now fast forward to 2023, So this guy was no longer working or helping. We couldn't connect back up with him. And so I talked to the Turkish geologist, Dr. Salih Barak Tutan, and I said, hey, do you have somebody you know who can review our data? He says, yeah, this lady in America is a good friend of mine. She has 40 years experience in the field. She has her own company. Send her the raw data and let's see what she says. And so that's what we did. And she was doing it on her free time. And within 6 months, she came back and said, hey, we're seeing a tunnel system about 4 meters down, and it's not filled in with mud, so you could actually hunch over and walk through it. And it's going down half the length of the boat, and it enters into this big cavity or chamber in the middle of the boat. And when she plotted it out, like we overlaid the data she was seeing onto a drone photograph of the boat formation, it basically showed at the 4 meter level this central hallway, we call it, leading down to what could be a central atrium, basically a way for air and light to circulate between the decks. That was starting at 6 meters or so, and it goes all the way down until we lose data at 13 meters. So it's a big hole in the middle that's not filled in yet. And so she was finding this new, data. And then below that, on this upper end of the boat formation, we could see very faint lines forming like walls to rooms, like this hash mark system, a pattern of right angles going across the whole upper end of the boat below this tunnel system at a deeper depth. So suggestive that, hey, maybe there are preserved walls still below the surface covered in mud and dirt that someday we hope to check out, excavators, core drill and get samples. But this was brand new. Is our exact data. Again, all we did was send her the raw data and say, what can you find in this? And so that was very exciting. That was back in 2023.
Oh, man, this is incredible stuff. Andrew Jones, thank you so much, man. I'm going to have you back as soon as I can. I wish we could just, like you said, excavate, go up there and really do like a really big, I don't understand why, But we're out of time today. We're out of time today, unfortunately. Yeah. But I'd love to have you back, man. NoahsArkScans.com. And again, go there and donate because he had to go into pocket to come on the show and give you free entertainment here. Noah's Ark Discovered Project on Facebook and Discovered Media on YouTube. Go to YouTube and play those ads. Help this guy out. Great work, man. What an adventure, man. God bless you. Great stuff. Andrew Jones, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. Glad to be on.
Oh, great, man. Thank you. Good night.